Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. I don't have a fancy profession, but I did meet some fairies once. My adept consideration. When I was little, we used to live near the woods. I spent the vast majority of my time there. Any time I needed to escape my house, which was often back then, I would run into the woods. To me, it was a magical place filled with wonders. I found all kinds of little creatures and treasures. I even found a good place to hide. My favorite place to hide was a felled tree. The inside was hollow. It was so big I could stand up inside of it, and it felt endless. Because it was my favorite place, I hid all my treasures there. Everything I ever found on my adventures went into that hollow. I also brought some books and a flashlight, as much bedding as I could sneak away, and snacks. It was my haven. As I got bigger and things got worse at home, I found myself hiding inside my hollow more often. Sometimes I would even spend the night. You'll think I'm crazy, but I swear that hollow grew right along with me. It didn't matter how tall I got. I was always able to stand inside. It seemed to grow longer, too. When I was older, braver, and bored one night, I decided to see how far it went. I walked for what felt like hours, and I never reached the other side. Instead, I found the village. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever encountered in all my time in those woods. The little structures were stone, and the entire village sat on a bed of moss. Each house was unique and had intricate designs etched on the stones. I had to get down on my hands and knees to make out the little patterns carved along the stones. I noticed that there were curtains in the windows. Some of the houses even appeared to have fires burning inside. My face was next to one of the little chimneys, and I sneezed as a wisp of smoke curled its way up my nostrils. When I finished wiping my eyes, I saw a little face peering from one of the windows. It looked awful. The skin was gaunt, giving it an emaciated appearance. The color was off as well. It resembled an old bruise with splotches of purple and green. The eyes gave off a yellow sheen and were bloodshot and bulbous. I shuddered when I looked at the thing. I found myself wondering what kind of person had made the village, and I wondered why they made the creatures look so hideous when everything else was so stunning. I looked away then, turning my focus to the little tiles that made up the roof. I ran my finger along the surface and thought about which doll I could bring to play there. As I got lost in thought, planning out which doll would live there, I felt a sharp sting in my elbow, like someone had pricked me with a needle. Upon inspection, I discovered the little person from the window was now standing in the yard. It held a sharpened little tool in its hand and was waving at me angrily. Now, I was 10 years old, which is far too old to believe in monsters and fairies. Still, this little thing looked exactly like a grotesque fairy to me. It had a set of ragged, transparent little wings, though it had just stabbed me and looking at it made me feel sick to my stomach. I found myself worrying whether it was sick. It kind of reminded me of my Uncle Rob. He had stayed with us for a few months when I was 6. He was sick, and my mother had told me he was going to die soon. I'm positive my parents had let him stay so they could use the checks he was getting. This little thing looked a lot like Uncle Rob had before he died, starving and exhausted, but still trying to fight. It had stopped brandishing its little weapon at me, but was regarding me with a look of suspicion. I held my hands out in the universal sign of peace, which it met with another sharp jab to my palm. The weapon dug in deeper this time, and the creature's eyes lit up as blood dripped down the handle. I watched, more than a little disgusted, as it lapped the blood from the weapon, and then eyed me expectantly. Some of you will think I am insane for doing what I did next, but I couldn't help myself. I was a lonely kid who had hidden in the woods for the majority of my life, and I saw an opportunity to make a friend. It didn't matter to me that at that moment who or what that friend was. I squeezed at the puncture wound until I had gathered a little pool of blood in my palm. Then I extended my hand and let it drink. When it finished, it looked a bit better than it had before. The color of its skin still resembled that of a bruise, but it didn't look quite as starved as it had moments ago. The eyes were no longer glossed with that sickly yellow color. Instead, they shined a brilliant gold. It made its way up my arm and closer to my face then. I watched with curiosity as it pricked its little finger and held it out to me. "No, thank you," I politely declined. "I don't eat blood." It kept waving its finger at me, growing more agitated with each refusal. I didn't want to make it angry again, so I finally bent down and licked the blood from its finger. I tried not to think about the possible diseases as I swallowed and gave it a half-hearted smile. "Not as bad as you thought it would be, is it?" The voice was that of a boy. He was staring up at me, a huge grin plastered on his face. Although his teeth were small, they were razor sharp. His mouth seemed filled with them. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts before I spoke. All that came out was a blundered, "How?" "I drank from you, and you from me. You have the blood of the Fae now, so we can understand one another." He had traveled back down the mossy area and was sitting there, waiting for me to respond. I couldn't come up with anything that resembled a coherent thought at the moment, so I sat there in stunned silence. "You seem nice enough for a giant." He held eye contact with me as he spoke, and I got lost for a moment in those shining eyes. "I expected you to tear down our village, so thank you for not doing that." "I'm not a giant." I giggled at the notion. "I'm a regular person. I don't know why you would think that about me. Your village is beautiful. I would never tear it down." "You look like a giant to me." The statement was matter of fact. Giants destroy things. "How long have you lived in this tree?" I finally gained enough composure to get a decent question out. That was the first one that came to my mind. "My family has lived here longer than you would be able to comprehend. My mother told me that our ancestors migrated here for shelter from the giants. When they began to take over our land, this tree appeared. It has kept us safe ever since." Somehow it made sense to me that the tree presented itself when these little beings were in need. I felt that it had done the same for me. "Why do you look so sick? Is that how everyone looks here?" It didn't occur to me until after the question slipped out that it was a bit rude. "We are forced to stay in the hollow, to stay safe from the giants. We need the sun to thrive, and there is no sun here. All our livestock have perished, and we have no light to grow crops. We live much longer than the giants, but their numbers are greater than our own. Our ancestors thought we would outlast them, but they reproduced like rabbits. There are always young ones to take the place of those who die." He was looking up at me, a sadness creeping into his voice. "My village will most likely die here, wasting away to nothing while your kind destroys what is left out there." It occurred to me then that I was, in fact, one of the giants. This fairy was talking to me about humans. Its people were stuck here in the dark of my hollow, while mankind ran amok outside. I'm sorry to hear that. I honestly was. I thought about the tales I had read as I looked at the little village. I wondered how many creatures humanity has doomed to extinction with their greed. I had seen the behavior firsthand in my own household. It was what caused me to hide. My parents' addiction had eaten away at them. Their behavior grew worse with each passing year. They were violent and hateful. Their greed grew to such an extent that their next fix came before all else. I couldn't even make friends at school because we had no water at home to bathe or wash my clothes in. I probably looked as disgusting to this creature as it did to me. "Is there anything I can do to help your people? I have snacks hidden away in my special spot. I don't know if you'll like them, but I can bring you some to try." "We need meat to survive. Meat and blood. Our young drink the blood, but as we grow, we have to have the meat as well. Could you bring us some?" The golden shimmer was starting to drain from his eyes. They were taking on that dull yellow sheen again. "Well, I guess I could bring you something from our freezer. We may have some hamburger in there. I don't know, though. It's been a while since my parents have gone to the store." My own stomach started to grumble as I spoke, reminding me that it was getting close to sunset. "It has to be something fresh." I realized what he meant then, and I grimaced a little. I'd have to kill something and bring it back to them. "Do you have something you could collect some of my blood in? I can try and trap something for you, but if you have babies here that need food, I could leave you some behind." I didn't like the thought of cutting myself again, even though the wound was small. I also didn't like the thought of babies going hungry, and that won out over all else. I knew what it felt like to starve, and I couldn't bear to let them go hungry if I could help. He ran around the back of his cottage and came back soon enough with 3 micro-sized wooden buckets. "These are all I have right now." He laid them out in front of me. I took the tool and dug at my finger, squeezing out enough blood to fill each of the buckets. Then I let him drink a little more. When I pulled my hand away, his eyes were shining that golden hue. "I'll try to come back tonight with something else for you. What's your name, by the way?" "It would be easiest for you to call me Faye." He grinned at me as I stood to leave. "I will tell my people not to fear you. You are kind for a giant." "Thanks, Faye." I smiled back and then took off down the path. My encounter with the fairy left me feeling lighter than I had felt in a long time. It wasn't every day I could do something good for someone else. Still, I didn't like the thought of killing an animal. I knew there was no way around it, and I tried to focus on the good it would do for the village. When I reached my house, I found my little brother Dylan crying in his playpen. Both my parents were strung out on the couch. Luckily, it was Saturday, so I didn't have to worry about missing my school bus. I picked him up and cleaned him up. His diaper had split open because it was so full. Then I scavenged the kitchen until I found some cereal and fed him. I felt sorry for him, being born into our family. Honestly, Dylan was the only reason I hadn't run away. I couldn't lug an infant around with me if I took off, and I would have felt like a monster if I'd left him behind. Had it not been for me, He probably would have starved to death or smothered by our stupid parents by that point. Neither of them could stand to hear him cry. They always got so angry when he would wail. After I finally got him back to sleep, I searched the house for the gun my dad kept stashed around the house. I knew he had one because he was prone to threatening my mother and me when he was angry. His favorite thing to use during those times was the gun. He would wave it in our faces, gloating that he could shoot us at any moment. At the time, his gun seemed like the best option to catch something for Faye. I had no idea how to make traps, and I certainly wouldn't be able to kill anything with my bare hands. I finally located it, hidden under a pile of rubbish in their bedroom. I knew I had to hurry. I was afraid that my dad might actually use the thing on me if he found out I had taken it. Because I spent so much time in the woods, I had learned to be quiet while I was out there. The animals were skittish and any small noise would scare them away. Under normal circumstances, I would observe them. I liked to watch them in their habitat. This was the first time I'd ever given thought to kill one. It made me nervous and sad. It wasn't too long before a deer crept into my line of sight. I lay there for what felt like forever, eyes blurred with tears, and tried my hardest to pull the trigger. I tried to think of the fairies and their need for food. I imagined Faye with his gaunt face and joyless eyes. I still couldn't bring myself to do it. Thinking back now, I wouldn't have been able to kill the thing with the pistol anyway, even if I'd managed a clean shot. At the time, I felt like a failure. I knew I couldn't kill anything, not even if it meant saving Faye and the others. I had started to make my way back home when I was struck with an idea. It was a deplorable idea, possibly the worst thought that had ever crossed my mind. Still, it seemed rational at the time. Instead of heading home, I made my way to the tree. The journey to the village seemed much shorter than it had before. I felt like I'd made it there in no time at all. I tapped as gently as I could on Faye's door, fearing that I would knock it off its minuscule hinges. I saw his face appear in the glass before the door popped open. "You came back sooner than expected. I just told my parents about you." There was a note of excitement in his little voice that made me feel guilty, but only for a moment. "I haven't got anything to bring you, but I have an idea about what you guys could eat." Two slightly larger fairies joined him at the door. They were staring at me with the same suspicion that Faye had before. I assumed they were his parents. "I have something you could eat. It would mean you could get out into the sun for a little while. I may also be able to make a hole above your village, so the sun could shine in." "You would take us with you?" His father spoke then. "Yes." "Why, you have no reason to do that for us," his mother spoke up then, placing a small skeletal hand on his shoulder. "I know what it feels like to be hungry, that it hurts. It's terrible. Plus, helping you could help me and my brother, too." By the time I got them back to my house, my parents had started to stir. They were still sprawled out on the couch, but they wouldn't be for long. I opened the top of the old bag I had placed them in and ushered them out onto the living room floor. "You can eat those two, but not the baby." I pointed to my brother, who was still fast asleep in his playpen. "He's off limits." "You would sacrifice your own people?" Faye was staring at me quizzically. "These aren't good giants. They're cruel and hateful." I was overcome with anger at the moment, remembering all the times my father had shoved that pistol in my face, all the times they had allowed me to go hungry so they could maintain their usage. I would gladly give them to you. What do you want in return?" "What do you mean?" I hadn't expected to gain anything, so the question took me off guard. "When you help our kind, you get a wish in return. We can grant you only one, so you have to make it count. Wishes cannot be reversed." He looked quite serious, but I knew what I wanted. I didn't even have to think about the wish before the words came spilling from my lips. "I wish me and my brother could have good parents." The notion made me dizzy with anticipation. A mother who would love us, a father that would protect us, bedtime stories and regular meals, no more fear of violence, no longer running in the woods to hide every evening. What I want more than anything is for us to have good parents. "All right," Faye placed his tiny hand on mine. "You will have good parents then." I watched as they ravaged them. My mother started to wake up as they devoured her, screaming as she tried to bat them away. By then there was really no use. Though they were small, their hunger was fierce. They had gouged crater-sized chunks from her legs and torso. I grabbed Dylan and waited on the porch then. I didn't want him to wake up and see what was happening. By the time they'd finished, the sun was high in the sky. They all appeared far better than they had before they'd eaten. Their bodies were no longer emaciated, and their eyes shone like gold in the sunlight. Their wings had taken on a dark hue. When the light touched them, they glinted with an array of colors. "The deed is done. You can take us back to the hollow now. When you return, you will have a new family waiting for you." It was Faye's father that spoke. Just like that? It seemed too good to be true. "Just like that. You have done us a great service. Our people will be full for a long time to come. We only ask that you leave the bag open on the walk back so we can feel the sun a bit longer." "I can do that." I smiled down at Faye as he nestled into the bag. "You know, you guys could come out of the hollow every now and again. I'm in those woods all the time and haven't come across any other giants there. You would be safe. We may take you up on your offer, giant. My name is Amelia, so you know. You can stop calling me a giant." As promised, when I returned them to their hollow, I used a step stool from home and a shovel to make a small hole above their village. The light that broke through seemed otherworldly. Part of me wished that I could climb through and see what was on the other side, but I knew I had no business doing that. The hollow had given me more than enough magic to last a lifetime. I told them all goodbye and carried Dylan home then. I cried when we reached the house. Big, ugly, grateful sobs. It was completely transformed. There were no holes in the window. The garden out front was clean and filled with flowers. I could smell dinner wafting out of the screen door, and I saw my mother inside. She looked exactly like my mother, but healthy. Her hair was clean and her face was free of sores. She was cleaning and singing to herself. I was scooped up into the air by my father. I flinched for a moment before realizing that he, too, was a better version of himself. "Why are you crying, honey?" His voice was kind and soothing. "Did you fall down and hurt yourself or something?" "No, I'm okay. I'm happy is all." I hugged him so tight that he laughed and told me I was going to suffocate him. "You're filthy, darling. We gotta get you and Bub cleaned up for supper." He lifted Dylan from my arms and scooped me up into the air with his other hand. "Out of the way, love. I got 2 filthy varmints coming through," he called out to my mother, and she laughed as she swung the door open for us. The rest of my life has lived out like a dream. I visited the Fae a few times. His people did take me up on my offer. They ventured outside to gather seeds for crop and wrangled them some livestock. They also loved to bathe in the sun. It did wonders for their people. They began to fly again, and their eyes shimmered all the time. When I was 13, the tree disappeared. I don't know if it was because I didn't need them anymore, or because they didn't need me anymore. There are times that regret tries to sneak up on me. I feel remorse for the exchange I made. When that happens, I remember how happy my brother was growing up. He had been too small to question our parents' sudden change. All he knows are the better version. The feeling slips away then. My brother and I were far better after the exchange. Good riddance to bad rubbish, as my mother used to say. So quoth this raven. My darlings, you know I have such a soft spot for the Fae, especially their dark side. This one seemed to work out very well for all involved. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe when we ask for wishes, or ask for their help and their blessing, we're not quite as willing to give. As long as you do it in the right way. But you all know that. Join me next time, my darlings. Bye-bye.